Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. I'm your host, Dr. Saksham Sharda. I'm the creative director at outgrow.co. And for this month, we're going to interview Phil Gamache, director of growth and lifecycle marketing at wordpress.com. Thanks for joining us, Phil.
Thanks for having me, Shaksham. It's great to be here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. It is nice and sunny outside. How about you?
Nice. Also doing good, but it's the opposite weather here. I'm based in Ottawa in Canada. I got a nice rainy Monday. Showers, I guess, are kind of starting.
Okay, so that's ideal for you to enter our rapid fire round, which we're going to start with just to break the ice. You get 3 passes. In case you don't want to answer a question, you can just say pass, but try to keep your answers to one word or one sentence only, okay?
Okay, if I don't pass anything, do I win something at the end?
You get a car. Just kidding, you
Okay,
don't win
sweet.
anything. This is marketing.
I'm shopping for a car right now, so that's perfect.
All right, so the first one. At what age do you want to retire?
I don't think I ever want to fully retire, but I'd like to kind of start that journey maybe around like 40 years old.
How long does it take you to get ready in the mornings?
20, 25 minutes.
Most embarrassing moment of your life?
Shortly after buying my first home, I fell for a door-to-door scam. I'll just keep it at that.
What is something that people often get wrong about you?
I'm introverted. A lot of people kind of assume that I'm extroverted when they first meet me, but yeah, definitely more on the introverted side of the scale.
Really? I thought you were extroverted. Actually asked me about how my day was going. No one ever asked me that. But all right, fill in the blank. An upcoming marketing trend is blank.
I'd say I don't know if this is upcoming trend for some. I'll go with propensity modeling, using ML models to predict audience behaviors.
Okay, we'll have to get into that in the long questions. The next one, the city in which the best kiss of your life happened.
Ottawa, Canada, and Ontario. Yeah.
Okay, pick one, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey, for sure.
The first movie that comes to your mind when I say the word ambition.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Okay, when did you last cry and why?
Ooh, getting personal here. I'd say sometime last year, almost a year ago now, my wife and I had a miscarriage.
Okay, the biggest mistake of your career.
Maybe staying too long at my first job out of university.
How long was that?
4.5 years.
How do you relax?
Long hot showers and watching science fiction.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Maybe don't stay as long at that first job, or stop chasing a salary and instead chase or look for interesting problems to solve.
A habit of yours that you hate.
Checking my heart rate on my Apple Watch constantly.
Okay, and the last question, your favorite Netflix show.
Oh, has to be on Netflix. I'd say Dark.
Dark, fair. Okay, well, that was the end of the rapid fire round. You actually scored 10 and 10, and I wish I could give you a car, but I can't. You didn't actually pass anything, even though I asked you the tough questions. So well
Nice.
done for an introvert. Okay. All right, long form questions. When would you say is the right time to implement marketing automation? Is it ever too early to implement it?
Yeah, super cool topic. Like, I don't think it's ever really too early to implement it. Like how deep you go and how sophisticated you kind of roll out some of these automations, like that kind of depends on the headcount that you have, like the team size or like the scale of the company or whatever. But yeah, I would say that like even early on, like day one, having an entry level tool like a MailChimp or MailPoet or ConvertKit, like whatever it is, even if you're just a one person marketing team, messaging your users when they're signing up for the product, whether it's B2C or B2B, like sending them emails after they've purchased something or sending kind of an ad hoc newsletter, just being kind of top of mind for your users. It doesn't have to be a like fledged, sophisticated nurture strategy or anything like that on day one. But I think the idea of having something in place from the start allows you to eventually do something with that data is like several years down the line, like when you are ready to invest in it. So like combining MailChimp or MailPoet with like some type of product analytics database where like if your B2B users are in your product, they're like engaging with it and using specific features, you're like starting to track that and store that somewhere, even if you're not doing anything with it. And maybe mapping that with like a CRM, like tracking like demographic stuff, deal sizes if you're more B2B. And then like one day when you hire a marketing ops person or a lifecycle person, they have like a data set to start off with. They're not kind of starting from scratch. And even if you're not doing anything with that data that you're recording from day one, your future self will be very thankful that you took the time to kind of set those things up. And yeah, your future self will be happy about that.
And so, do you think marketing should drive revenue, not leads? Do you agree with the statement?
Yeah, definitely, wholeheartedly. That's one of my principles, for sure. I think that like it's easier said than done though, in especially in B2B companies that sell like a very expensive product that has a very long sales cycle. But at the end of the day, like what you do should try to be revenue focused. A lot of teams try to like invest too much in this kind of like holy grail of attribution and multi-touch and try to figure out that like everything they did like has some type of impact on revenue. But as I've kind of grown in my career, I've discovered that like doing incrementality testing and figuring out what your marketing team is doing is a lot easier when you're trying to do like lift tests or experiments or A/B tests, like whatever you call them, being able to like separate a piece of your audience from not receiving a message or not receiving a campaign, and then like comparing that to the audience that does receive it, and then like seeing the impact of that over time. Ultimately like that should lead to revenue, but yeah, easier said than done. Like when you're a small startup team and you're just like don't really understand anything about attribution, and like at the end of the day you like to drive revenue, but sometimes in bigger B2B companies, when you're kind of like working with a sales team, oftentimes like that really means just driving leads, but at least try to focus on quality leads. Even though you're not necessarily like touching revenue, like some of those leads might turn into revenue, but at least like focusing on what is a quality lead, like chatting with your sales team, understanding a bit more about like the ideal customer profile that you're trying to drive to the website. But yeah, in an ideal world, marketers should be driving revenue for sure.
And how would you relate this to the lessons you learned from your first stint at entrepreneurship at Captive Creative?
Yeah, this is really taking me back, like almost 10 years ago now. My first job out of university was a B2B company. So I was working in-house, like selling SaaS. But before I started there, like in university, I did a couple of internships. They call like co-op internships in Canada, and one of them was like spending a full year at an agency, and I loved it. Like I thought I found my people, like working on a bunch of different companies, different products, different technology tools. And I told myself, like, yeah, one day, like I see myself starting an agency. And so while I was kind of in-house in my first role, I was kind of like feeling that itch a little bit of like working with different people, like uncovering different types of problems instead of like always the same customers, the same product. And started my own little agency with a university buddy. And at the start, we were just like setting up Google Analytics for kind of like mom and pop shops, more like friends of friends, and setting up WordPress sites, which is interesting, kind of full circle where I am right now. But yeah, in terms of like um learnings from that, like the biggest one, like I still have a bad taste in my mouth about taxes. I know the US is very similar to Canada for like self-employed individuals, but like taxes just like really aren't fun at all. They don't motivate people to like start their own businesses. I don't miss that part of it for sure, but I think that, like, I did it too early, like, that was maybe one of my biggest learnings, and, I see a lot of people doing that too, like, they graduate and they're just like, "I'm starting an agency instead of working in-house," and I didn't really have, like, a sophisticated network yet of, like, people to reach out to, or, like, I didn't have, like, a personal brand, we can talk about that maybe, but, like, it was tricky to like find interesting work, or people that were willing to like spend money for digital marketing consultants. That was like maybe a third learning there, is that like mom and pop shops are not digital savvy and are willing to like figure out how to do those things, but they're not willing to spend the money on it. They don't see the value of it kind of right away. But yeah, I definitely think I did it too early. Like, I'm not closing the door on it in the future, but that would be my advice. Like, work in house or work in an agency, make some connections, like grow your network, like get a body of work and experience, and figure out what you like to do. Because like when I did it, I didn't really know like what I like doing. Like, I was setting up GA, building WordPress sites, setting up like social profiles for companies, like doing everything that they kind of needed, but didn't really know what I enjoyed doing a lot. So like spending time in house and in agencies like allowed me to kind of discover what my passion was. Kind of like fell into marketing automation and life cycle and more like Martech stuff. So yeah, if I was to do it again someday, like I have a nice idea of what that niche would be, and a bit more of a network now. So I feel like it would be a bit easier.
Mhm. And so at this point in your career for WordPress, your mission is to drive growth and engagement and life cycle. So could you talk a little bit more about what that means from a marketing standpoint? What were the obstacles you had to overcome in order to get started?
Yeah, so yeah, growth and engagement. Yeah, part of a small lifecycle team on WordPress.com right now. We have tons of users signing up for the product, and tons of different types of users. So we have small, medium businesses that are setting up like WooCommerce sites, selling something, and then we have like the other end of the spectrum that are just like everyday users, like setting up their first blogs, or setting up a portfolio site, just setting up a simple site. And those are two completely different sites of users. And there's like a panoply of like different users in the middle of that as well. So we can't really have like one message going out to like all of those users. Those users all have different use cases, different goals. So lifecycle comes in when we're trying to figure out a framework for sending the right message to the right user at the right time, and tailored to what their past behaviors have been and what their goals might be in the future. That's where lifecycle comes in. We kind of start post acquisition, if you will. So some of the challenges there are taking a nice big chunk of users and trying to get them to come back into the product. So oftentimes, like product teams will focus on just like generating signups, and like 85+% of signups in SaaS like don't ever come back in the product after signing up. So that's where like marketing needs to be closely tied into that onboarding journey, and being a piece of the puzzle where like, all right, if the majority of users are like leaving after that first couple of hours on the product, how do we get them to come back in the product and see the value of the product and create these kind of like habit loops? So that's what our team focuses on. Like, how do we create messages, notifications, and then we send them to users, and so that they're like interesting and valuable to users, not just like annoying and they just kind of like opt out of it, but like really focusing on like what the use case is for that user at that stage in their journey, and how can we help them, motivate them to get back in the product, like finish building their website, or discovering a new piece of the like a new feature that we just launched. So the challenges are I guess like it's cross collaborative endeavor, if you will. Like, we have to work with the product team, our martech team, our data teams. So there's a lot of like collaboration that we need to do, and understanding who our users are is like easier said than done in the world of WordPress. But that's a problem a lot of SaaS companies have as well. And yeah, like converting that into like the unique value propositions for all of those different use cases and building like a framework for how do we actually go about doing that personalization? How do we go about like making sure that the messages that we send are valuable to users, but also like we talked about, that are turning into revenue and incrementally like we look at like all the stuff that we do. Are we pushing the needle on revenue, or are we just kind of looking at like leading indicators and click through rates and stuff like that? So, yeah, I think it's super interesting because like a lot of companies just like focus on that first piece of the puzzle and the last piece of the puzzle, which is kind of like acquisition and then monetization. We acquire a bunch of users on the website. All right, now that we have them, how do we push all those free users into like becoming paying subscribers? But a lot of companies forget that middle piece. This is like life cycle, and this is all about driving engagement for existing users, getting them back into the product, seeing the value of it, and then naturally wanting to upgrade and become paying users. And then you have to like focus on less of those levers, and like all that acquisition work like becomes a lot more fruitful, and like that retention becomes easier as well. So yeah, easier said than done, but I think it's super important work.
So, what do you think specifically prevents companies from successfully personalizing customer experience at scale?
Yeah, I think it has to do with like based on where the company is in their size or their journey. Like it probably has to do with just like the amount of data that they have access to. Like I mentioned, like one of the things that I'm really big on right now is propensity modeling, using ML models to kind of like predict user behaviors. And that sounds really nice and fancy. And it's only something that like large companies with massive data sets get to play around with. Like your average startup that's like 2 or 3 years old, like doesn't have enough data to like build models and predict what users are going to be doing, let alone like trying to personalize some of those messages. So I think like making it a priority is like the first step of the journey, and like trying to gather that data from users and doing that in a way that you're not like annoying users, you're not slowing them down in the sign up process, right? Like asking questions when they're setting up their website or your users are signing up on your site, like not asking too many questions so that you're like annoying users and they don't finish the sign up process, but asking like valuable questions so that you're like tailoring the experience for users in the product, but also using that to like tailor and personalize your messages, whether it's an email or SMS or push notifications or whatever. But yeah, like I think that like the biggest obstacles are a like having the data in the first place, or like prioritizing that so that like in 3 or 4 years, like when you decide to do personalized journeys, like you do have that data to kind of play with. I would say this the second or the third, I forget which one I'm on right now, but the technology piece, right? Like it's easier said than done for sure. Like I think marketing ops and martech teams don't get enough credit in the personalization world, and like at the end of the day, like none of that stuff is implementable without like having that technology piece in there. And so like figuring out your strategy is the one piece of it, but then also having the tech in place to be able to do that. I think those two kind of come hand in hand, and just having one without the other like isn't going to allow you to do that. Oftentimes teams will just think that like having a clear bit on the website plus like maybe a drift like a couple of years ago when chatbots were like the hot thing. But like at the end of the day, like if you don't have a strategy on like understanding who your users are and what they're trying to do, and like what a valuable message looks like for a subset of your users, like the technology pieces won't figure that out for you. So yeah, I think prioritizing it, the data piece, the technology piece, but then like also having a good strategy for figuring out like what is a valuable message for the subset of users that you have.
And I guess we should have talked about this before, but how do you think conversion rate optimization is implemented differently for B2B and B2C clients?
Yeah, yeah, WordPress, like we get to play with both B2B and B2C side of the audience, like I kind of mentioned. And so I've gotten a taste of that, but previous in my career, like I was mostly all B2B. So I would say that like largely the implementation pieces are very similar. Like there's still like the core principles about like understanding your users, knowing their pain points, their use cases, and then like all the experimentation methodologies, like following the right like hypothesis, figuring out like what should be your tests, how long you should run it for, what your sample size should be to hit 90-ish% significance. Um, so that's the same in B2B and in B2C, and like you need to do those well in both cases. But I think when it comes to like tactics and actually like optimizing on some of those levers, it is different in B2B versus B2C, mostly because B2B has like a lot longer sales cycle than B2C. When you think of like traditional B2C, like maybe it's like selling shoes or selling like an e-commerce, like you're more the e-commerce side of things. Most of the crow that you're doing on site is to just like generate more sales, and the majority of those sales happen like on the first, maybe sometime the second visit for those users. So a lot of the crow is around like on page, homepage testing, seeing how many sales we can increase by running some of these A/B tests or these lift tests. But on the B2B side, like sometimes the tests that you're running, it doesn't really matter about the quantity. Like I mentioned, like marketing should always try to drive revenue, but sometimes it's not always possible. And like the leading indicators are leads, but at least try to make it quality leads. So sometimes like your crow experiments could be focused on driving more quality leads, like more MQLs or more PQLs for your sales team. And sometimes that means like driving less conversions. And that's a completely different kind of methodology than B2C. Like B2C is all about just like the number of total raw sales that we can generate from crow. And then B2B, it's a lot more about like, all right, on our homepage, can we change the sign up button to book a demo? Instead of book a demo, do we revert that to another landing page and people can just like see a video of the product? Or do we have a chatbot? Like there's so many different levers to kind of like talk to sales when you're B2B. If you have a sales team, right? Like not all B2B companies have a sales team, especially companies that are going more of that like product led approach. But yeah, I think the principles, the implementation is still the same in both B2B and B2C, but like which parts of the funnel you kind of optimize are going to be different because in the B2B world, the sales cycle is a lot longer, and there's also much higher number of like buying personas as well. Like oftentimes a decision maker won't be the one kind of browsing in the first place, and so like doing all your crow experiments on like someone who's just going to be like evaluating the tool but not actually like purchasing it is going to like skew all of your data in the first place. So yeah, different nuts to unpack for sure.
And we've heard you're a big supporter of no code and low code tools. And to what extent do you think they are capable of entirely taking over and giving value to customers?
Yeah, I actually run my own podcast on the side. It's called Humans of Martech, and we did a full episode on that. Like we dive super deep on low code, no code. I think it was episode 32. But like one of the thesis that my co-host came up with this, John Taylor, like the definition of no code and low code is pretty loosely built in the industry today. And what we kind of came up with is the definition of a low code tool is a tool that allows you to break the dependency on technical experts as well as subject matter experts. So in a lot of marketing teams today, maybe you have like a graphic designer and you have an HTML person or someone that's kind of like a web designer, front end designer. Today, in like the no code, low code tool, if you're using Canva and you're using WordPress.com, it's saving you from having someone who knows front end design and HTML and CSS for a lot of the work, right? Like at the end of the day, like someone who knows CSS is still essential in my opinion. But like Canva, like think of Canva as kind of like replacing a lot of like graphic design skills in some companies. Like before you had to have some Photoshop skills to be able to do like something very simple that you can do in Canva today that's kind of like available for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, like even though those tools are helping marketing teams maybe like launch stuff faster than they were able to before and breaking that dependency on some of those subject matter experts, at the end of the day, like how you deploy those tools and like the strategies that you have behind them, the people behind those tools, that's really what matters. So like I don't think that just having like 15 no code and low code martech tools on your team is going to allow you to like provide value to customers right away. I think at the end of the day, like how you deploy those tools, the people behind them, setting up the strategies for them, that's a lot more important to invest in. And those are the ones that are going to drive value to your customers, the inputs that are going into the low code tools more than the low code tools themselves.
Fair. And so we had an audience question as well, because we heard that you're into fantasy hockey. Which NHL team reflects your fantasy endeavors?
Yeah, I can chat about fantasy hockey for days here. Probably spend too much time, too much personal time on fantasy hockey already. I don't know how much you know about hockey teams, but over the last couple of years, like a dominant team has been the Tampa Bay Lightning. They kind of created like a dynasty. But yeah, not to pat myself on the shoulders too much there, but my endeavors would be similar to the Tampa Bay Lightning, I'd say.
Okay. And the last question is, what would you be doing if not this in your life currently?
Hmm. I think that I would probably be like blogging or doing a newsletter for fantasy hockey. I've often thought about like how to match or like the intersection of like my fantasy hockey geekness with like my background in email marketing and marketing automation and how I kind of tie the two together. But I've always struggled with it because like fantasy hockey is like such a tiny niche of the world. And but yeah, like if I wasn't if money wasn't an object, if I wasn't doing what I do today, like I think creating my own site or like having a newsletter around fantasy hockey would probably be something that I'd kick the tires on. But I probably still do the podcast too. Like Humans of Martech has been super fun. Just reaching out to folks and like doing guest interviews, but also we do a lot of like deep dive episodes on like specific topics. So like we'll just like chat about like email marketing deliveries one day. We'll talk about like lifecycle. We did like a 5 series episode on lifecycle. So yeah, it's been a nice kind of like way to kind of dive into work related topics, but also just like having a conversation and loosely diving into some of those topics. So yeah, I don't know, I don't know if that really answers your question.
Oh, it does kind of. Okay. Well, that's the last question. So thanks everyone for joining us for this month's episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. That was Phil Gamache, Director of Growth and Lifecycle Marketing at WordPress.com. Thanks for joining us, Phil.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for nominating me for Marketer of the Month.
Well, check out their website for more details, and we'll see you once again next month with another Marketer of the Month.